Hello everyone, welcome to the Hooded Casual. Today we're going through a very basic Stormweaver Spark build. As usual, a little disclaimer. Remember, I'm far from being a veteran player in this game, so any suggestions would be greatly appreciated. Rather than being an actual guide, this can be considered more of a showcase of the current state of this build. Let's not waste any more time and jump straight into it by talking about the two main sources of damage for this build. The first is Spark, a lightning-based skill that fills the screen with projectiles, bouncing off walls and traveling far beyond what you can see. It's incredibly effective at clearing maps, as the sparks can hit enemies even outside your field of vision. The second source of damage is Cast on Shock. This is a persistent buff that gathers energy whenever you shock an enemy. Shock is a debuff that increases the damage enemies take, and it can be applied by any lightning damage, in our case, Spark. As you shock enemies, Cast on Shock gathers energy. When it reaches 100%, it triggers the linked skill, in this case, Lightning Conduit. This skill scales its damage based on the magnitude of the shock applied to the enemy, creating a powerful synergy between these mechanics. Now let's go over the items and their average costs as of the time of recording. This build uses a Wand Scepter setup to ensure we have enough resources to run all the auras we'll discuss later. Starting with the wand, it's not the best possible, but it's decent. Look for stats like lightning damage, spell damage, mana, extra damage as lightning, plus levels to lightning spell skills, and cast speed. We don't need critical strike chance or crit damage bonuses since this build doesn't rely on crit scaling. Ideally, you'd want more spell damage and plus 5 levels to lightning spells, but those aren't mandatory. Hypothetically, this wand could cost around 4 divines. For the scepter, it simply needs 160 spirit to make the aura setup work, along with mana, intelligence, and mana regeneration. No more than 1 divine for this piece. For armor, I think a good option is Mortar Invictus. I like the version with elemental resistances, making it easier to balance your defenses with other gear. Other important stats include increased maximum mana per socketed rune. Without perfect rolls, it's affordable, costing around 1 divine. Other gear slots like gloves, belt, helmet, and boots should focus on mana, intelligence, energy shield, and resistances. These pieces are relatively inexpensive, costing around 1 divine each. For boots, add movement speed into the mix, which might push the cost to 2 divines. If you'd like, I can prepare an easy-to-follow guide on how to use POE trade efficiently. There are many ways to find items that seem expensive but are actually affordable. Rings play a critical role in maintaining high mana regeneration. I strongly recommend breach rings for their maximum quality cap. Look for stats like mana, mana regeneration, and gain mana per enemy killed. I think 40 to 50 total is more than enough. While lightning damage is a nice bonus, it's not required. For the best value, buy rings without quality and apply Neural Catalyst yourself to maximize cost efficiency. These rings usually cost between 1 and 2 divines each, but with a little awareness you can get them for much less. Finally, the amulet slot is occupied by Everlasting Gaze. This is the only source of energy shield in the build and adds an extra defensive layer, which is very handy during gameplay. It costs about 1 divine, and while the anointment is optional, it's a nice bonus if you can afford it. I want to specify that all gameplay in the video was recorded before the amulet was anointed. For flasks, we don't rely on life or mana flasks. The build sustains itself through passive regeneration and flask effects, so you can use any flask that fit your preferences. Oh right, about the secondary weapon. We just need a staff with mana, Sigil of Power as the skill, and plus levels to all skills. So right now we're sitting at about 12 divines, and keep in mind that I'm overestimating the prices here. And that's it for the items. Let's move on to the next part. Alright, now we're going to go quickly through the passive tree. Let's start with our Ascendancy. As you saw, we're using the Stormweaver Ascendancy, which gives us access to permanent Arcane Surge and a big damage boost, with the ability to apply Double Shock and enhance our exposure, which we apply through Orb of Storms. We'll talk more about that later. The red lines here refer to the passive tree points allocated specifically for the main weapon set. These points are crucial mainly because they let us allocate big damage boosts for the main weapon set and increase curse effectiveness for the secondary one, which is represented by the green lines. To apply points in one set or the other, simply press the button in the top right corner. Here there's a section on the lower side of the tree that I'm still experimenting with. I'm not entirely sure if it's the most efficient way to spend points, but it's something I'm trying out. This is part of the trial and error process, and so far it seems to be working well enough. Now about jewels. One of the most expensive options in the passive tree is Controlled Metamorphosis. You don't actually need this jewel, it's something I'm experimenting with to see if it improves the build. I'm also exploring ways to adjust the tree to use fewer points in some areas, and reach this important node here about skill effect duration, which I currently don't have but would like to incorporate. Another key node to mention is Mind over Matter, which is the reason why this build feels so tanky. With Mind over Matter, the damage we take is absorbed by mana before life. During maps, this means we'll lose Energy Shield first, then mana, and finally our 1 HP of life because of Chaos Inoculation, which grants immunity to chaos damage. For jewels, I'll include a link in the description to a POE trade search filter that can help you find good ones. The most important affixes to look for on jewels are increased magnitude of shock. This significantly boosts damage from lightning conflict and spark. Meta skill gain increased energy, increased skill effect duration, which helps spark travel further and every single buff to last longer. If possible, look for additional modifiers like increased elemental damage or spell damage increases, but those are optional. As you can see here, none of my jewels are perfect, not even close, but they still do the job. I think that's enough for the passive tree. Let's move on to the next part. Alright, now let's talk about skill gems. Let's start with our main source of damage, Spark. Remember to enhance the quality of your Spark gem, as this increases the number of projectiles it fires. For supports, we use Inspiration to reduce mana costs, ensuring we can sustain our abilities without running out of mana, and Conduction to ensure we consistently apply Shock. For Cast on Shock, also make sure to enhance its quality, as this increases its energy gathering efficiency. It's linked to Lightning Conduit, which should ideally have quality as well. The supports are considered Casting, Impetus, Elemental Focus, and Energy Retention to maximize its damage and consistency. Another part of our setup is Grim Feast, which allows us to gather Energy Shield almost continuously during maps and even double its amount. This setup also enables us to run Blink with Second Wind and Ingenuity, which has saved me in countless situations as a mobility skill. Archmage is a persistent buff that provides more lightning damage and spell damage based on our maximum mana. The supports are Clarity for increased mana regeneration and Lightning Mastery, which gives an extra level to Archmage. For minions, we use Skeletal Warriors, which come from the Scepter. These are supported by Meat Shield, Minion Master, Last Gasp, and Elemental Army. These supports keep the minions alive as long as possible because we use a Soul Offering setup to boost our spell damage. The supports for Soul Offering are Persistence, Ablation, and Dance Macabre, which further amplify our spell damage. Next, let's talk about Sigil of Power. This skill swaps to the secondary weapon set automatically when needed. The setup for Conductivity includes Cursed Ground, which locks the curse to a specific spot. This works well for this build since most bosses don't move much during fights. Remember to assign the second weapon set to cast the curse so it benefits from the passive tree points that enhance curses. Another support skill for Spark is Flame Wall, supported by Fortress and Spell Cascade. Lastly, let's discuss Orb of Storms. This skill is critical for applying lightning exposure, which reduces the target's resistances further. With Abundance and Unleash, a single cast releases 2 Orb of Storms simultaneously. I'm currently experimenting with 2 setups, Font of Mana, which increases mana regeneration, and Electrocute, which stacks electrocution on the target, stunning it for a short duration. I'm still testing to see which setup feels more comfortable. That's everything about skills. Remember to place Spark on the primary weapon set and adjust other skills depending on your preferences and weapon setup. For mapping, I basically only use Spark and occasionally Flame Wall. For bosses, you'll want to stack Sigil of Power, Flame Wall, Orb of Storms, Conductivity, Soul Offering, and Spam Spark. I'll leave you now with some additional map gameplay. Don't forget to subscribe, share your opinions, ask questions, or suggest improvements in the comments. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.